Hello again. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Sohaila Bana. I'm a city council member representing District 4. I'm honored to have our retired police chief, Bisa French, who happens to live in District 4, with us, and also our new police chief, Tim Simmons. Thank you both very much. I just want to explain the reason why I've been so impressed by Chief French. When I came, one of the first things I did, I went to different centers in the city that work against violence against women because that's something I've always been passionate about. And I learned about the Latino Center, the Family Justice Center, and I learned that Bisa French, while in the police department, has been one of the founders, and they had a detective over there actually to help with women who faced violence. And now, after retirement, Bisa French is going to lead the Family Justice Center, which is one of the major organizations that works against interpersonal violence and gender-based violence and everything. I don't want to get much into it. I just want to say that personally, I'm fascinated by her character, all the great work and service she's been doing for the community. And then through our meetings, I had the pleasure and honor of learning more about Chief Tim Simmons as well. And I know that our police department has faced major challenges in recent years. Their service is very important to us as emergency responders, especially to District 4 that has wildfire risk as a serious risk many of us are concerned about. And under California law, the police department is responsible for our evacuation and our safety in case of a wildfire. So, uh, without much introduction, I would like to ask Chief Bisa French or retired Chief Bisa French to please tell us about your experience, challenges you face, looking at your experience. Share with us whatever you may. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see everyone as just a District 4 resident and not the police chief. But as obviously the last few months, I've been reflecting a lot over my 28-year career in Richmond, and the last six being the police chief. And while it has been very challenging, especially the last 6 years, overall, I had a really great experience in the Richmond Police Department. And so I'm just grateful for the experience. I'm grateful to be able to serve this community. I think the greatest challenges probably are just in the differences in the way people think about safety. I think overall, everyone in our city, every elected official, everyone in the police department, all community members, we all want a safe Richmond. We want Richmond to be a safe place where there's not only just a sense of safety, but actual safety, or other way around, not just actual safety, but a sense of safety too. And I can say that over my career, starting out 28 years ago in the late 90s, and going into the early 2000s, that things have really changed in our city. As a young officer, I was going from call to call and homicide to shooting to homicide. I worked in the years when we had the largest number of homicides in the city and with low staffing and in very challenging times. And, going from a time where we had 50 homicides a year to the last year where we had, I think we ended with five, was six. We ended up with six. Very different. But there's still this kind of sense of that Richmond is dangerous, which we can be very dangerous, and we still have our challenges around violent crime. It's not like it was, but it's not where we want to be. Um, just as I reflect, I am proud of the changes that we've made as a city. I'm proud that, when we started, it was just, the police department working on safety, and now we collaborate a lot more with a lot of different city agencies and community-based organizations. Just as Councilmember Bonner said, working to start the Family Justice Center where we can not just, respond to domestic violence calls, but we have the ability to actually hand victims off to um, to receive additional resources. So being in the police department in a time where we can do that and create more than just a response to calls, we created wraparound services for victims. I'm really proud of that work. Um, I can say for just the last few years in terms of after George Floyd and dealing with defunding. Um, these last few years have really taken a toll on just, I'm sorry, somebody's not
I'm
muted.
so sorry. I'm trying to mute everyone. Everyone, please mute yourself. And I cannot see who it is that is not muted yet. Please mute yourself. I have difficulty with my screen. Okay, thank you. Sorry about it.
That's okay. Um, Going from a police department where, over the years I was there through the growth and going from having, you know, uh, lower numbers of officers to really increasing our numbers, getting up to, I think, 203 officers, and seeing what we were able to do and how we were really able to build a community policing model that was modeled across the nation. And then that kind of being dismantled was very difficult because um, as a young officer, I saw the challenges that we had and even just responding to calls because we didn't have enough people. And to go back to that place was really disheartening, especially since we were a model for community policing and we are a model for, what we can do in our city and to keep our city safe by creating this community policing model. So for it to be dismantled was very difficult. It took a toll professionally and personally for me. So I'll stop right there. I don't want to take up most of the time. I think most of your time should be spent with your new chief and hearing about his vision for the future.
I was planning actually to that you would have 20 minutes and chief 20 minutes and 20 minutes for question and answer. Not all of us have been living long in Richmond. If you could please explain what community policing means and how Richmond was a model across the nation.
Sure. So when I started at the police department in 1998. And back then, it was the police department had an idea of what safety should be within our community. And we went out and we policed in a way that we thought the community needed to be policed. In 2006, Chris Magnus came, a chief from a completely different area, different state, and he brought with him a CompStat model of policing, where we looked at stats to see where crime was actually happening and seeing how we can impact crime in those statistical areas. And he also brought the community policing model where we really integrated with the community and we heard from the community about how they wanted to be policed. And we worked together on a plan to police the city of Richmond. And that plan proved to be successful in that we were able to significantly reduce our crime rates here. And we built trust within the community based on those relationships. Chris Magnus at that time expected us to get to know the people in our beats. He wanted, beat officers to stay in that particular area for the entire year so that they knew all the problems in that beat. They worked with other community organizations and other city departments to partner on those long-term crime issues. Before that, we had community policing, but there were only certain officers that did community policing. So, for instance, when I got started, After I passed probation and everything, I was a community policing officer in the Iron Triangle. And my particular area was Atchison Village. And so I was just, that was pretty much where I stuck to the areas in Atchison Village and around there. And the other office, and I worked on long-term problems in that area. So that's what the community policing officers did. They worked on long-term problem solving in particular areas. Well, when what changed was when Chris Magnus came with his community policing strategy, every officer was expected to be a community policing officer. That meant that if there was a problem in your beat, then you worked together with your other beat officers and any other resources we had to solve that problem. So everybody in the entire department was expected to practice community policing. And so we built relationships with people, and again, we listened and we worked together to solve those problems. And so when we did have homicides happening, people were actually calling in and calling us with information because we worked for years on building those relationships. And so that it was a really successful model. It was Loretta Lynch, when she was Attorney General, came to our department to highlight what we were doing and actually praise the work across the nation as a model to be followed.
Thank you. And why is it that we don't have this model anymore?
Well, in 2020, the city council specifically um, voted after George Floyd, they voted to move away from that community policing model. And if you go back and read the documents from the city council meeting when that happened, it actually stated we want to move away from the community policing model to another model, which reduced the budget in the police department. It doesn't say reduce the budget in the actual reading, but something to that effect, because they wanted to create alternative responses, which we loved. We wanted alternative responses. We just didn't want to reduce our budget. So in doing that, through the process of that, there was initial discussion about taking $10 million from the police department budget. I had to create a budget of what the police department would look like with $10 million less in our budget. And the only way I would be able to do that was to lay off officers. And it meant laying off somewhere around 34 officers. And so, as that discussion continued for about 4 months, um, officers decided they weren't going to stick around to see if they were going to have a job come July 1 when the budget was voted on. And so we lost a lot of officers during that time. I think we had somewhere around 160 officers, 63, somewhere around 163 officers at the time the discussion started. And by the time they passed the budget July 1, we were down to 145 officers. That's how many officers left in that time period. And then after the budget was passed, we still continued to lose officers because they didn't know if our budget was going to be impacted every year after that, because of the sense they got from the council during that entire discussion about defunding. And so we lost a lot of officers. I think we got down to a low of about 103 officers. And so we've been trying to rebuild since then, but it's hard to recruit officers to come work for the city of Richmond.
And you mentioned that it has had a professional and personal toll on you. I wonder how much you would like to elaborate on that. Hi,
Yeah, just leave
Karen,
it on
could you
the,
please
try and stop it.
mute yourself? I'm sorry.
Just trucking.
Okay, I muted you. Don't worry. Sorry, Chief. Go ahead, please.
So professionally, it was difficult because I wanted, I'm getting out there, I'm talking to all of my officers, I'm telling them, that, I'm fighting for them, I'm fighting for their jobs, that, I want to tell them that they're safe, they're not going to be laid off. But I honestly couldn't say that for a long time until that budget was passed. And professionally, not being able to protect my staff. And I'm hiring staff. A lot of these people are people that I actually hired. Um, and so, telling my staff that it's possible they might not have a job in a few months was very difficult. And trying to encourage my staff at that time was extremely difficult. And so I was going to every council meeting I could, every neighborhood council meeting. I was talking to the community as much as I could to let them know what was happening, which ultimately led to a lot of community members coming to the council and demanding that no, don't take, don't lay off officers, and we don't want that. So that was good, but it I was working 60 to 80 hour work weeks during that time, and that was also the time that we were having some family issues with my daughter, and I know a lot of people know that my daughter had left, and she was impacted by human trafficking, and it was a very difficult time in my life.
I'm very sorry. I had the pleasure of meeting your daughter at your retirement party. And your
Yes.
mom, and I personally thanked your mom for having raised you, and I met your auntie too. So, could you also talk about the impact on the services? I remember that there was a substation by fire station number 63, and there was always a police officer, and then it wasn't anymore. And I heard there was a substation in Hilltop. What services did they provide, and what happened, and what services were impacted in general?
A lot of services were impacted. Our response was impacted. Obviously, we could do a lot more with 160 or 200 officers than we could do with 100. And when I say 100, and we got down to about 103 officers, that doesn't include the officers that we had off on injury leave and sick leave. And, as an officer, my experience has been anytime I've been injured, I want to get back to work as quickly as possible because I know it's impacting my, fellow coworkers and stuff like that. But we got to a point where we are mandatory overtime. Officers were exhausted. They still are. We still have mandatory overtime. They're exhausted. And so we didn't see that same fight for officers trying to get back to work. We would have, multiple officers off for many months at a time, up to years actually, and people weren't trying to hurry back to work. It was the first time that we saw officers retiring from stress, PTSD. I hadn't seen that in my career. So lots of impacts there. So we didn't have enough staff to continue on with a lot of our what I call ancillary work groups. So we used to have special investigations, and these were the things that drew people to come to work to Richmond because they knew that, okay, I can work in patrol for a little while, but then I could go work in investigations, and I could work in special investigations and work in, work undercover in a drug unit, or I could work, doing probation and parole. There were a lot of different work opportunities for officers to engage in, not just patrol. Um, and all of those ancillary units that we had, we had to eventually cut. Even our traffic unit, which would be standard for any police department, we had a standalone traffic unit that always had at least five traffic officers and another two DUI officers. And we ended up having to cut our traffic unit because we just didn't have enough officers for that unit. We're slowly bringing it back. I think there's two officers there now. But that was the last unit that I had to cut, and that was the most difficult because one of the biggest complaints I received going to community member meetings and talking to community people is that traffic is about traffic issues.
Could you explain what traffic unit does, please?
Sure, traffic unit deals with anything traffic related. So not only do they participate in our special events like parades and stuff like that, but on a day-to-day basis, they issue traffic citations for speeding, red light violations, different things like that. They respond to traffic collisions. So one of the things that I heard was, well, you still have 9 people across the city at any given time because we have minimum staffing. So minimum staffing wasn't affected. So why are you saying that it's a problem? You know, you still have enough officers for minimum staffing. Well, and they were asking why would response times be any different if you still have 9 officers? Well, response times are impacted because all those ancillary units that we had, traffic, we had what we call a Bravo team, which was a foot and bike patrol. All of those people were able to respond to calls for service if the beat officer was tied up. Now, if we don't have that, then you just have to wait for a beat officer. So you're going to wait
Right.
longer response times. Um, the traffic unit, like if there's a fatal traffic collision, those investigations take hours to complete. So now you have a beat officer having to do a fatal traffic collision or wait there until we could call somebody with specific knowledge about traffic fatalities to come out from their house to investigate it. And so it just impacts our whole flow of operations.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I would like to ask Chief Simmons to please let us know what your plans are. We heard about some of the challenges. I'm sure there is more. And I'm sorry actually for what you had to go through as a police chief, all those challenges that affected you both professionally and personally. And I heard at some point you said you were tired, and that's why you were retiring, because you're not fully retiring. You're going to another agency. Would you like, actually, before we move, briefly just tell the public they may want to know where you're heading to after Spain? I
Sure.
know you're traveling to Spain.
Yes. I am taking 6 weeks off, but I have accepted another position with the Family Justice Center, which Councilman Rabana mentioned I helped to establish here in Contra Costa County. And so the Family Justice Center now consists of 5 different centers across this county and one in Solano County. And we deal with domestic violence, sexual assault, elder abuse, child abuse, and human trafficking. And it's a one-stop shop where victims of those crimes can come and receive services and start with their healing process. And not just those victims, but those victims and their families.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. At some point in the future, after you settle in, we'll have another meeting and you explain the community about what the Family Justice Center does, because I think it's
Sure.
awesome and the community needs to know more. With that, let's turn to Chief Tim Simmons and ask how you would like to address the challenges of the police department, what your plans are, what your
Sure.
priorities are, and everything.
Well, first, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Councilwoman Bana, Vice Mayor Robinson. Congratulations on your election. Well deserved. I also want to just acknowledge a few other staff members that we have on this call because I want the community to know some other important resources that are listening in. We have our crime prevention manager, Michelle Milam, who's listening in on this call. So if there's when it comes time for the question and answer time, you have a few other people that might be able to chime in. And we also have some of the crime prevention board is actually on this call, Cindy Hayden. I think I also saw Carla Perez is on the call, and there may be a few others, but those are the ones that I see. So I just want folks to know they're here also as a resource for this conversation, for the District 4 conversation. So let me start by saying, first it was a pleasure and an absolute joy working with Chief French my entire career, but most, closely since 2019, where I really got to work with her at an executive level. Our careers, she was obviously way ahead of me in her career, and I was always trailing in different areas. But in 2019, we were able to marry up, and I was able to work really directly with her all the way up until 22, when she promoted me to be her assistant chief. So a lot of these challenges from the executive level that Chief French talked about, I was part of trying to help problem solve and keep the department afloat and help her problem solve through these issues. So I'm going to dovetail, and one of my initial priorities for 2026 is to continue addressing the staffing issue. Um, one of the warnings and points that Chief French tried to really make clear when we went through the whole reallocation of funding and dealing with the George Floyd issue was the fact that as we are losing personnel, in order to build back, it takes a significant amount of effort and time to rehire a police officer to regain what you lose. So I want to educate the community really quick so they have an understanding of what it takes to hire a police officer. So the moment you have a recruiting plan and you're able to cast a net to try to recruit eligible candidates, they're invited to come take part in a written testing process. And the written test, by state law, they have to, state law and city ordinance, they have to score um, a minimum score. It's called the post-appellate B test. So once they get that minimum passing score, so you lose a lot of people there because they don't score high enough, okay? And then you get your group that does. And then they're invited to the police department and they have to pass a physical agility test, which is also a requirement. And it's not a crazy physical agility test. It's the basic type of physical agility that any community member would hope and expect and want one of their public safety personnel to be able to accomplish in order or to demonstrate in order to serve in that role, because it is a physical role at times. So once they pass that, then they have to go through an oral board, and it's an oral panel of experienced supervisors and managers that have preset scenario-based questions that they ask each candidate, and there's a scoring metric that goes through that, and you're trying to gauge whether this person has the right mindset, do they have the right motives, do they really understand what they're applying for, and so there's a weeding out process there. And then after you have your candidates that pass the oral board, they have to undergo an extremely scrutinous background investigation, the most prying background investigation probably out there for any profession. It goes all the way, it goes back a minimum of 10 years into your life. Most of them go back longer. And they're talking to every employer you worked at, neighbors you live next to, landlords you have, your educational transcripts to see what kind of a student you were, your criminal history. The pre-background packet is 32 pages long, full of questions that they have to fill out and answer. And then they get scrutinized by an investigator that goes through to try to make sure you're telling the truth in all these different areas and all these different ways, and interviewing all these different people to determine, does this person meet the state minimum requirement to be a law enforcement officer? Once you have someone that's passed a background investigation, it goes through a review process from a sergeant, lieutenant to a captain, all the way now up to the chief of police. In which case, Chief French at the time, myself now, we decide, are we going to interview this person or not? We interview them, they get a conditional offer. Now they have to pass a medical exam and a psychological exam after that interview. And if they complete all of those things successfully, then they're hired on as a police officer.
On
That
probation, right?
on probation, and they still have to go to the police academy. The police academy takes 6.5 months to complete minimally. Then they come out of the police academy and they start the real training in the field training program at the department, which is also a minimum of another 6 months. So even from the time we hire somebody, it's at the bare bones minimum 1 year before we ever realize that officer on the street as still a probationary officer able to provide law enforcement services to our community. So the amount of money, the amount of time, the amount of resources that goes in. So when we lose an officer, that's what it takes to replace that officer. So when we lose one, to replace that one, you're looking at a minimum of a year to a year and a half before you're able to replace that body back with a new police officer. In the meantime, our community goes without. And the thing that really rubs me the wrong way mostly is our community has invested in the officer that we lose, the training, the hours, the supervision, the relationships in the community. And to lose that individual to another jurisdiction or another city that doesn't have to now put that investment into them, they get to take advantage of our investment. That's really where I'm like, we want to protect our investments, and our officers, our employees are our investment to our community. So that's just a brief overview of kind of what the hiring and the replacement process looks like. So one of my main priorities going into 2026 is to really ramp up, continue to focus and ramp up on the staffing. It has been a priority. It's going to continue to be a priority and something that's important to me. Um, One of the areas of focus on the recruiting aspect that might change slightly is we're placing now a premium on trying to recruit lateral police officers. So there are other wonderful officers out there that we might be able to entice to come work at Richmond, where they don't have that upfront year runway that they have to go through in order to start working. A lateral officer, we're able to put them in our training program immediately, and usually within 6 to 8 weeks, we can have them in service, um, providing service to our community. So I'm really hyper focused on how can we make Richmond an attractive place for working professional police officers that meet our standards, that meet our guidelines, that have a demonstrated history of doing the job the way that our community expects the job to be done. How can we entice them to come work here at Richmond PD? And at the same time, trying to recruit, new, 'cause it's not one or the other, we need them both. So and then as we improve our staffing levels, we just sworn 4 laterals a couple weeks ago, or was it maybe it's not even a couple weeks? It might have been a week ago, last week. Yeah, last week I think we sworn 4 laterals. I interviewed and gave a conditional offer to one today, which was great. So as our staffing numbers improve, um, the very first specialty unit that I intend on trying to bring back to the organization is one that Chief French just talked about, and that was our traffic unit. We need to return RPD to being a full service police department. The city of Richmond, of 100+ thousand people, spread out the way we are, as we have a pretty spread out community base. District 4 is actually pretty spread out and separate from, even where the police department is. It's about as far as away from the police department as you can get. Um, we're a very active community. We have a community that has high expectations, and it's a community that deserves a full service police department. I don't know how whoever might be paying attention to the news, but the city of Vallejo just announced today that they're having to rely on the sheriff's office now for augmented patrols because the city municipal police department cannot service their community. We're roughly the same size population as Vallejo. We have roughly the same types of calls for service, same quantity of calls for service. And I'm telling you, as the new police chief in Richmond, I do not want to have to ever come to the city council or the city manager or this community and say that RPD is not capable of providing the service that the city requires. And now we need to try to lean on the county sheriff. We have this is not a knock on the sheriff's department. I actually started my career 17, almost 20 years ago. I started with the sheriff's office for a couple of years. But we have drastically different philosophies on how law enforcement services should be deployed, should be used in a community. We are accountable to the community of Richmond. And the sheriff is not necessarily accountable to the community of Richmond. And we want Richmond to have their police department full service. So that's one of my goals in 2026 is to try to reinstate some of the units through aggressive recruiting, aggressive hiring, to reinstate some of the units so we can get back to being a full service police department. And that'll start with our traffic unit. We used to have 2 traffic officers, but we actually lost one to a heart attack recently that was due to probably stress. I'm not a doctor, I don't know that, but he was otherwise a very healthy person. Um, we lost him to an unfortunate heart attack, and now we're down to unfortunately, one traffic officer. Um, so to reconstitute and restaff our traffic unit, reconstitute, restaff that foot and bike patrol, that Bravo team that Chief French talked about. I know that we have Juan Munoz on this call, 23rd Street. I meet with them every single month, both his business association and there's another 23rd Street Business Association, and there's another business on association on McDonald Avenue. There's not a meeting that goes by that they don't ask for officers that can be walking the business districts, high visibility, building relationships. That is part of what our Bravo unit and Foot and Bike Patrol unit used to have the capacity to do, along with really addressing a lot of acute quality of life issues that would rise up. They would be able to really start addressing those things before they ballooned and escalated into bigger, larger problems. Um, so between the traffic unit, our Bravo unit, and then bolstering our investigations, we've had to collapse all of our investigations units down into three separate units. We used to have, I think, six. So we've maintained our commitment to the Family Justice Center, and Chief French will be happy to know that. So we have 5 detectives and a supervisor that we staff the FJC through. And so even though we've gone through some of these tumultuous staffing issues, our commitment to human trafficking, our commitment to gender-based violence, to support the work of the Family Justice Center has never wavered. And I'm here to tell you that's going to continue. It will not waver under my leadership. There will always be that commitment to the FJC and the work of the FJC. So we have 5 detectives there and a sergeant. And then we had to collapse all of our other investigative units down to a general crimes unit and a homicide unit, where we used to have specialties, where they could specialize in investigating certain types of crime. Now everybody has to sort of be a generalist, and fewer people doing more things, which means it takes longer to work through the investigations.
Sorry for interruption, but could you name those investigation units? Don't assume we know
Sure.
everything.
The ones that we used to have, or the ones we currently have?
The ones we used to have,
Okay.
and
Yes.
which one do we
So
have
to
now?
reiterate a little bit of what Chief French talked about, so we used to have a probation parole unit, and so what their role and job was when folks would parole out of state prison or would probation out of state prison or out of the county custody system, and they would come back into our community, they have very strict um, guidelines and regulations and things that they have to abide by so that they don't reoffend. The state system is quite honestly derelict in really being able to do the job they need to do to make sure people don't reoffend. So we had a unit that supplemented that in RPD specifically to work with in the city of Richmond to make sure that people stayed on the right track, were able to fulfill their terms of probation, fulfill their terms of parole, and didn't find themselves in situations where they were turning into reoffenders and that recidivism where they're going back to state prison. So it was quite frankly, it was a preventative unit that helped people acclimate back into regular society and get through their terms of their parole or probation. So that unit has been dissolved. We had a community violence reduction unit that focused on gathering intel on the individuals who were responsible for committing gun violence in the city of Richmond. And their attention was focused on individuals who committed gun and gang violence. So if they were going to participate in gangs or if they were going to participate in committing gun violence in our community, they had the attention of that specialty unit right there, where they were able to stay on top of them. They knew who they were, and we tried to cut things off before they escalated into shootings, before they escalated into having victims. That unit is now gone and dissipated as well. We also used to have a narcotics unit. Laws have changed around narcotics in the state of California. Um, that's for sure, but there still are a significant amount of illegal drugs that come through the city of Richmond, and we find them in car stops, we find them and through other means, through warrants service and things like that. So we used to have an investigative unit that solely focused on the narcotic trade, in Richmond and the vicarious crimes that would be associated with narcotic trade, because what goes hand in hand with narcotics sales and transportation is usually gun violence. And so those two things tend to go hand in hand, and that unit served to interrupt those networks, make sure those networks were not operational in Richmond. And that unit has also been gone. We used to have two separate homicide units so that they could investigate not just homicides, but also attempted homicides and shootings, and so that every case got the proper attention. Now we collapse those two. So instead of eight investigators and two supervisors, we have one supervisor and four investigators. And so most of their attention is on trying to solve the homicides, which means a lot of the other gun violence cases can pend for certain periods of time, longer than what we like just due to staffing issues. We used to have a property crimes unit that solely focused on investigating crimes and victims of property crime, your stolen vehicle, fraud, elder abuse, um, grand theft, uh, all of the petty theft stuff, like businesses in our community that were being adversely impacted by people walking in and just taking what they want and leaving, and then eventually the business is shut down and closed because they can't stay open like that. We serve that unit served to investigate those cases, and then lastly, we had a robbery unit that really focused on aggravated assaults, armed robberies, and strong arm robberies, and what we call SDs robberies. All of those units I just mentioned, every one of them are all now, they used to each have two to three detectives. They've all been collapsed down now, and we have one group of four with one supervisor that handles all of those cases.
Tim, can
Yes.
you talk about the regulatory unit also?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So then we also had our regulatory unit, which was responsible for um, vetting and regulating all of our marijuana dispensaries in the city, and the illegal sales of tobacco and alcohol to minors in our city. So they worked in conjunction with the state's ABC unit, which is Alcohol Beverage Control Unit, and ensuring that all the liquor stores that we have in Richmond comply with proper ABC law, and they're not selling alcohol or tobacco to minors, which we would run operations where we worked with the school district, and we had minors that weren't working with their parent and released by their parents, parents were agreeing, and they would come in and do these undercover alcohol sales. And man, I was part of that. I for a moment supervised that unit, and I would go out with that unit when I was a sergeant, and we would have, and on a Saturday night, we would have four, five, six of our liquor stores that would sell alcohol to our kids without even batting an eye. Um, and that was as we started to crack down on that, I mean, the consequences for a liquor store doing that is pretty severe, up to the point where they could lose their liquor license, which is the ultimate shutdown, right? Like if they lose their liquor license, the business is gone, the liquor store is gone. Um, and at the end of the day, who we're trying to protect is our youth, um, from having early onset addictions and the other things that having them end up driving just 16, get their license, and they're drinking and driving and not knowing the effects of alcohol, or getting them addicted to tobacco. So that whole unit is now gone, and the responsibility to regulate the smoke shops and the marijuana dispensaries, it now rests with a very severely understaffed unit in our code enforcement. The problem with that is code enforcement can't really do the regulation that they're charged with doing, because there's elements of it that require a sworn police officer to be with them in order to confiscate certain things, and enforce certain laws. You have to be a sworn officer to do that. So even though we've lost the ability to do that within our agency, we're still the ones that get tasked with partnering with code enforcement to still go back and do it, but we don't have the capacity to do it, so it all has to be done on overtime. Um, on a voluntary basis because people are already being forced to work patrol, and so we don't have the ability to force them to, work some of these other specialty assignments. So that unit has been lost altogether, and it's not been kept in the police department in any way, shape, or form. So back to the goal. The goal is to improve our staffing, and I'm hyper focused on that. That's actually one of my major goals. At the end of 2026, I want to be able to look back and see that we made some progress. As it sits right now, we have 25 vacancies, police officer vacancies, as of today. How much progress are we going to be able to make on that? It's an ebb and a flow, but my goal is to be able to look back in 26 and say we have less than 25, and hopefully some of these full service units that we talked about, starting with our traffic unit, I want to be able to say we've made progress in reinstituting some of those units, at least one of them, at least the traffic unit. So that's a goal. Another one of my main goals, and again, this is something that Chief French talked about going back to the Magnus days when we had the staffing to do it, is to really reconnect our officers with the neighborhood councils. Um, there is also not a time that goes by that I engage with one of our neighborhood council presidents where they are not asking, when are we ever going to have our officer back? I remember Officer so and so, and we miss having that connection. One of my favorite definitions of community aligns with one of the principles of policing I really buy in. And the definition of community is simply a group of like-minded people. And one of the principles of policing that professional policing was founded on back in the 1800s by Sir Robert Peel was the people are the police and the police are the people, or the community is the police and the police is the community. In other words, becoming like-minded and finding a way to understand what is it that the people want and need so that they have that sense of safety and they have that actual safety. Well, the only way that's going to happen if there's an integration of officers at the community level, at the neighborhood level, where they're hearing from them, where the beat officer hears from the people who live in the beat that they're charged with protecting. What is important to you? What things would you like me to address? There's going to be the obvious stuff that officer will already know about. But when we have that level of connection back at the community level, you're going to find out, like District 4, it might be fire protection, right? That might be one of the priorities. Well, as a police department, what's our role in fire protection? Well, it might be coordinating with the local fire department that's up there to help bring a resource to the table that the police department doesn't have, to build a bridge to communication. There's a variety of ways that officers connect community to resources beyond just a call for service, a 911 call for service. Most of the improving quality of life things happen at the grassroots level when the officers understand how to become like-minded with the community, and that the community is the police is the community, and it's a process of working together. I would really like to be able to look back at the end of 26 and say we've made progress in that area. And that's going to coincide with our hiring, right? So the more that we're able to recruit and hire, the more we're able to reconstitute people and refocus some of our patrol officers to being able to reconnect with neighborhood councils back at that grassroots, um, back in that grassroots level. So I was always a South Side officer, and I remember as an officer and a sergeant, really working with the Whitmore family. So they're from another district, but really being able to like work with the Whitmores, who were neighborhood council presidents in beats that I worked with. We were able to figure out there's parking issues in these neighborhoods. The lights aren't working in the park. Well, are those police issues? Well, not directly, but indirectly they are. And we're the one of the only departments that are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And again, going back to being able to bridge communities to solve neighborhood problems, which is actually part of our mission in a collaborative manner, helping to bring resources to the table. Hey, as an officer, I can't fix the lights, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a hold of our public works guy, or I'm going to talk to my supervisor and see if we can get a hold of public works to find out what the status is about fixing the lights in that park, and maybe even inviting that a public works person to the next neighborhood council meeting where we can discuss this issue, or I can be armed with the right information to come back to the neighborhood council with to say, hey, I have a status update, and I'm gonna, as your beat officer, I'm gonna help push for this to get fixed.
Chief
Um,
Simmons,
yeah,
if I may, I
yeah,
think it's a very good time for a question. Actually, one of
sure.
the reasons brought it up, but it's a question for the whole community. I want to thank Volker for some of these questions, but it's my question too. So the city now have the community response team, I believe it's called ROC. I forget what ROC stands for.
Reaching out with
But
care and kindness.
say it again, please.
Reaching out with care and kindness.
Awesome. So why would we need, one of the reasons that it's hard to maintain the sufficient number of police officers is the cost. The pay is high and then pensions and everything, because they're armed and, certain risks, deserves higher compensation. Why don't we give some of those positions to ROC members to have a leaner and more efficient police officers to address only violent crimes? Is
Okay,
that possible?
that's a great question. And the short answer is I would say no, that's not possible just to have officers address violent crime. Yes, it is possible to have some of the issues that officers are required to respond to have an alternative response. Chief French said it already. We always have been in support of an alternative response. The difference is, or not difference, but where I don't think it's really clearly stated is it is not one or the other. It is yes and the perfect environment in which alternative response works and where law enforcement response works is when there's communication between and cooperation between the two entities. There will be many calls that will start off as perhaps a police call. And once the officers determine that this is not something that an armed officer needs to respond to, they're going to call for a member of the ROC team, if they're available, to come and and it'll be a warm handoff in order to take that call over. And vice versa. There's going to be calls that the ROC is going to go to, and something escalates quickly because the ROC will never be a program that is designated to handle potential violent situations or situations that have already developed into violence. And they're going to be requiring or requesting that an officer responds in their absence. And then there'll be times where there's a co-response, where they're dealing with a situation where they know it could be potentially violent. The ROC will stage while the officer goes in and makes sure there is no threat to harm. And then they'll trade places, and the member of the ROC team will go in and be able to answer that call. But there, I would really love to see our city get rid of the mentality that there needs to be, it's like one or the other. This system works best when there's a collaborative between the two, and we can provide the needed service to our community,
Well, for
as a team.
example, the regulatory unit, the
Yeah.
smoke shops and alcohol, why do we need an armed officer to do that?
So the ROC will have they have no authority to regulate any type of law at all. They can go in and ask, they can go in and say, hey, please, can you please not sell alcohol to our kids? Can you please not sell cigarettes? In fact, we did a few of these searches recently with the code enforcement team, and we found stolen guns inside the smoke shops. We found illegal drugs and mushrooms and psychedelics in hidden compartments throughout the smoke shops. So they were hiding them, and then kids or whoever would come in, and they knew that they could purchase something there other than just, snacks or cigarettes or whatever. There will never be a civilian response to those kinds of situations because they can't enforce state or federal laws.
Along that line, I know many residents didn't want the flock cameras go, but I believe they're disabled right now. Uh,
Yes.
how efficient are they in in assisting the police department in the sense that keeping it a little leaner?
Extremely. So actually, one of the statistics I brought to talk about in this meeting is we in 2025 we reduced stolen vehicle theft by almost 24%, like 23 point something percent from year over year. And when you do a deep dive into that, you're able to see that the flock cameras played a major role in that reduction because as cars were reported stolen, we were finding them and we were catching the car thieves. It's a few car thieves that are responsible for most of our stolen cars in our city. And they go around and they steal cars and they bring them to chop shops and they sell them in different markets. And when you wake up in the morning and your car is no longer there, that majorly impacts your life. Flock was a major part, a major resource of our ability to have a real impact on stolen vehicles because we were able to apprehend people shortly after they stole the vehicle or it was reported stolen before it made it into its final destination. The decision that I made to turn off Flock had to do with the fact there was a back end feature that exposed our data to what was called a national search. That if another agency had a complete license plate number and they put it into their national search feature, it potentially exposed our data to see if that full license plate, complete and total license plate number ever hit in Richmond. I have no evidence that our data was ever actually accessed, but I do have evidence that where I know that it became made available for full, complete license plate searches. And when I found that that was the case, um, that was not the way that we were trained. That was not our belief with what Flock was. That was not what our commitment was to the city council. That is not what our commitment was to our community. It always has been that we have a closed network and that we do not share our data with anybody. So I made the decision to turn the cameras off until I got more information about what the problem actually was and what the solution to fixing that problem might be. And I can tell you, I've had many conversations with Flock executives. The problem has been rectified. It actually is not even a feature that's allowed in California anymore. So Flock has completely removed the national search feature as even an option for any state of California agency. Um, so I would really like to turn the cameras back on. Our community deserves to be able to leverage technology properly. We have several cases pending where we know that Flock would have helped us resolve them much quicker than we have, and some that aren't even resolved yet that we think we would have been able to resolve. Like we had a pretty violent armed carjacking not that long ago, where if we would have had Flock up, we would have known exactly where that car was before it ever left our city.
Thank you very
And
much.
yes,
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go
no,
ahead.
no, I know I'm a talker. I'm sorry.
Okay, so it's almost 7. I have one more question that's very
Yes.
important if you have time. And uh, after that, if you still have time and there are questions from residents, we can extend that another 5 to 10 minutes. But this question is about evacuation. And actually, we are going to invite you to an evacuation drill in May Valley. Marianne, who is here, a resident of Robert Way, has requested it, and we, West Contra Costa Fire Safe Council, have reached out to the fire department and reaching out to you to do it. One of the major issues that we have, Richmond's draft safety element says it takes 9.5 hours to evacuate just Richmond residents in El Sobrante Valley, which is not acceptable. So we would like to offer pre-evacuation to elderly and mobility challenged residents, those with pets. And I'm going to come to your office and discuss in details whether we could have pre-evacuation on red flag days into Marina Bay Park. But the main question is, how do we verify the ability of the police department for evacuation if something happens?
Well, that's a good question. I think in order to really truthfully and accurately answer that question, we're going to probably need to do a dry run and maybe a tabletop exercise at minimum to have an accurate understanding of where the ingress and egress locations will be and when a fire breaks out in certain locations and how to evacuate people to the safest location, which I think I'm offline. You and I talked about Marina Bay Park being one of those possible locations to try to get people to ferry access, water access, furthest away from the hills, that sort of thing. And so I'm certainly open to and offering some help from our team to sit down and really look at a plan with the fire department so that we can make that assessment accurately. Because quite frankly, to my knowledge, we've never actually looked at that from a reality standpoint. Like that question being posed, I'm not so certain that we've actually ever answered that question. And I would be happy to sit down with the fire department, fire chief, and let's look at the dynamics and do maybe a tabletop to see what the actual resources would be required.
So the city hires consultants to do the safety elements. Have they reached out to you?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that. And I know you will be very busy, short of staff, but please, let's plan working together on that with the fire department and safety element consultants to answer that question. With that, I'd like to first thank Michelle for all the comments, and please put them all in one email because I don't have the ability to share chats along with the recording. But if you could please put everything in one email, I'll send it along with the link to the recording. And with thanking both of you, I wonder if there are any burning questions. I usually don't want to keep my guests over time, so we can invite you again, and you'll be willing to come back again. Are there any questions for either retired Chief Bisa French or our current Police Chief Tim Simmons? Um, um, Okay, yeah, one of the concerns actually, I think Marilyn's bringing it up, is possibility of earthquake and ruptures of all the gas lines, hazmat gas lines.
Yeah.
Is there any preparedness? Because I believe again, it's the police department as emergency responders, not only to keep law and order, but a lot more than that. Any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, I can't speak specifically to like ruptured gas lines, but what I can tell you is we do have a contingent of our officers that are trained with what's called the Contra Costa County Mobile Field Force. And it's a county-wide where we police departments combine resources and urban search and rescue, evacuations, fire rescue for evacuation purposes is part of their training that they train on. So we do have officers at Richmond PD that have that specialized training that are still, I think we have a contingent of 12 or 14 officers that are specialized in that would take leadership roles. Every officer, in an emergency, we would have all hands on deck, but we have people that have specialized training that would take lead roles in helping the rest of our personnel execute their duties the way they're supposed to. But I do think that we need to sit down with a safety consultant that can identify where the problematic areas might be in our community as it relates to evacuation, such as gas lines or other things that we might not even be thinking about. So I don't have a direct answer to that question, but I do share the concern that we need to get to the bottom of stuff like that.
Thank you for your information. By the way, I should mention that I've invited some researchers at the UC Berkeley Seismology Lab to come and talk about a possible earthquake, what may happen, what we can expect. Maybe we should coordinate before that presentation so you have a complimentary presentation or set of information for the city council. With that, I would like to ask both you and Chief French to let us know how we can both as city council member and vice mayor who is present here kindly and residents, how can we support you or assist with anything?
I would say get involved, stay involved, be active. As a council member, that a lot of things are talked about and discussed in council and decisions are made. And I can tell you that it was really effective when we were going through the whole defunding process when the residents showed up and spoke their minds. And I'm not telling you what to say, I'm just saying that it was helpful for the police department when people spoke in favor of having a full service police department.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, I'm a big believer that a house divided amongst itself cannot stand. So places where we can find unity, and that's why I say yes and. So when we talk about public safety, to not create the divisional lines between, the rock and the police department or the fire department and the police department, but that public safety support of this from our community and our elected officials gets behind all the dynamics of public safety and that there's support in all of those areas so that everybody involved in it feels supported and that we can make Richmond an attractive city for people to want to come work in the public safety profession.
Thank you very much to both of you. I would like to thank everyone who has attended tonight's meeting. And I want to give a special thank to Michelle, who is my Wikipedia when it comes to crime issues, homeless issues, everything, any cry of help, I reach out to Michelle. Thank you so much for always being out there for everyone. So thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. Good luck on the next chapter. Chief French will be in touch, and Chief Simmons will be in regular contact. Thank you,
Thank you very
everyone.
much,
Have a
everybody.
good
Take
night.
care.
Bye. Have a good night.